Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. As I always say, don't use YouTube as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. You really do. Let's watch.
I'm still going to have concern of being second choice. I need time.
I'm not sacrificing what I want, but I am compromising.
Welcome to marriage.
Okay.
Do you want to settle down?
You're meant to have the best wedding of your life, but this isn't it.
All right, so they're hitting on the highlights. The first highlight of note is Chelsea and Kwame, and at least the summary of the conflict that they're presenting to us as in the edit is that Kwame is on the fence as to whether or not he wants to marry Chelsea or even get married at all. I don't know. And then we're also seeing the moment with Micah and her friend. How can I summarize my current feelings about this, having watched it, reacted to it, and thought about it afterwards? I think that the friend was reacting legitimately, seemingly. I can't know if it was manufactured, but it looked legitimate. It looked authentic. Maybe amped up a little bit, particularly in the beginning, but who knows? I have a hard time believing that the friend would always act that way, because Micah and the other friend seemed a little aghast at her behavior when she just very quickly said, "I don't like Paul." They were like, "What?" So I have a feeling like it started out with some amplification. You know, there's pressure from the producers maybe, but at the very least, you know you're being filmed. I mean, just imagine you're on a reality TV show and it's your birthday party. There's a lot of things at stake. You have a lot of friends there. You have a few drinks. I don't know. It just seems like a chaotic situation. I'm not making excuses for it. I'm just saying that there's a lot of different possible factors. But I think a lot of it at least was in line with her personality and her behavior. Micah stated as much, that the friend has done this frequently. So I think that the friend, who knows what's going on with her? If I were to assess her, then one, I couldn't share it with you because of confidentiality. But in this imaginary world, if I did, I imagine that I would find something along the lines of abandonment trauma, betrayal trauma, and thus a very black and white way of looking at relationships where you're either all in or you're all out. There's no in between. And if you are with someone else, if you're going to marry someone else, if Micah is going to marry someone, then my heart feels very, very negative about that. Cognitively, of course, I understand that people are going to get married, but in my heart, it's very threatening and very sad to me, and it'll paint the way that I look at the world. So within this model of thinking, and I don't know if it would be true, but within this model of thinking, it's tempting to say like, oh, well, they're manipulative, and this is often a word that's used for people with borderline. And my experience is that these individuals they're not consciously manipulating. When we are, and I'm not diagnosing her with borderline, I'm just saying that's an example of when people will use the word manipulative. But in my experience, when I treat people with borderline or people with abandonment trauma, betrayal trauma, they are not consciously manipulating. You know, they don't wake up in the morning and say like, ha ha ha, I'm going to control people. They just see the world that way because as they're being abandoned as a child, it's very, very traumatic, very, very hurtful. Then as an adult, they have a friend that's about to get married. It feels like an abandonment again, and they go back to a very, very young place where they're very undifferentiated, immature, and primitive in their understanding of how people work, and they don't have any inner resilience. And so it feels as though it's a betrayal, even though rationally they might understand that it's not. They're like, well, rationally, I know that she's just engaged to this guy, but how come I feel, and this is all unconscious as well, but I feel like this is a betrayal. I feel like this is an abandonment. I feel like Micah is abandoning me. I feel like this Paul guy is screwing everything up for me, is completely ruining my life. And thus, I deserve to go after him because look what he's doing to me. It's this complete lack of differentiation, meaning a complete lack of the ability to reflect on one's emotions. Because it wouldn't be unusual for a friend, really, really good friends, to be bummed out, a little bit of grief when you find out that your friend is engaged, because it means you're going to have less time with that friend. That's okay. But if you're differentiated enough, you can look at that feeling and say like, well, yeah, that's the feeling I'm having, but it doesn't mean that I'm actually being betrayed right now. It's just the ups and downs of life, and hopefully we can see ourselves through this situation. I'm guessing I'm not going to be able to hang out with my friend as much which sucks, and there's no way around that. But it doesn't mean that someone is wronging me. That's the difference. That's the differentiation ability. So I imagine that something like that is going on, some sort of trauma or schema that is playing into this distortion based on how it feels to her, and thus she did all the things that she did, and alcohol.
You didn't want to sit here and talk. You're like, I'm leaving.
What else am I supposed to do? Sit in my feelings and sleep next to someone who said that I was not man enough for them?
So the summary here, and I'll try to be brief because I don't want to bore everyone, is in terms of where I'm at, having contemplated last week's episodes, was that, I don't know, there's so many question marks about, and I see a lot of speculation. I see a lot of assumptions that are speculative. A lot of people saying, well, clearly Jackie wants someone to beat her in bed or something like that, which we don't know. Based on the language they were using, and maybe we'll find out, but based on the language they were using, in my experience, there's literally hundreds of possibilities as to what they were referring to. There's even a chance that she was using that phrase, I want you to be more aggressive in bed, I want you to boss up, not having anything to do with sexuality, but has everything to do with just her worrying that she's going to be abandoned. And she's just routing all of that worry into sexual criticism or something. That's just one of of 1,000 different possibilities. The things that we can point to are that he did call her a project, and at the very least, he sees her as someone that has more issues than he does. And I think a lot of people watching the show might agree with that. Of course, we can't know because it's just a edited reality TV show. But it's possible that she has a lot of issues from her past that create a lot of emotional reactivity from her, a lot of vulnerability, a lot of need for support and help and kindness. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. And for the two of them, I was wondering about these two categories. Is it just that she has a lot of emotional needs, at least maybe currently, maybe not permanently, but maybe ongoing? But either way, are we in a category of a non-overfunctioning, underfunctioning, a non-codependent and underfunctioner relationship where Marshall is differentiated, he is mostly securely attached, he doesn't have the kind of traumatic history that she does, and he's a very kind, altruistic person, and it's just at this time in their life, in their relationship, he's the one giving her a lot of support and kindness, and she gives back by loving him and by thanking him and hugging him and crying in his arms and appreciating his help. There's nothing wrong with that. It can be a problem, but there's nothing pathological about that. It's just circumstance that two people fell in love and one person has a lot more emotional needs than the other person. People look at that and say that that's imbalanced. It's not necessarily imbalanced because, as I said, she gives back with hugs and loves and appreciation, that kind of stuff, and everyone gets their needs met. The worry is that the Marshalls in that equation don't get their needs met, but they might have other people that they can talk to, and it's possible that Jackie would also take care. And we did see evidence that Jackie did notice moments where she could capitalize on the situation and actually take care of him. It was brief, or were we looking at a scenario where it's a codependent underfunctioner relationship where she's underfunctioning and he is codependent and overfunctioning? They both participate in that dance. They both need it to be that way subconsciously. The underfunctioner wants to underfunction to some extent. The codependent person wants to overfunction. They feel comfortable there. It is a result of schemas and reactivity and defenses that you can listen to my deep dives on codependency and underfunctioning. Which one were we looking at? And at the beginning, I was hoping it was category 1, that we're looking at a mostly healthy version with just normal issues in there. But then as time gone on, particularly during this fight, at the end of this fight, when he called her a project, that's when it really started to concern me that we're looking at a codependent underfunctioner. I will say that the evidence that we saw indicated that it's not severe codependent underfunctioner because pretty quickly he was able to walk it back and say like, okay, you're right, project, that's a bad word. But then he just used other language that was toned down, but still in that vein. He's like, well, you have so much potential. When I look at my wife, that's not what I think of her. I don't think she has so much. I mean, yeah, I guess if I thought about it, but that's not my prime directive. It seems like who knows, but it seems like it's kind of his prime directive is I am going to help her meet her potential. And on one hand, you're like, well, of course, support and helping your partner reach their full potential. What's wrong with that? But it seems like a focus. There's also a kind of superiority that he has, not in the narcissistic area, but in the codependent, overfunctioning area, where he seems quite sure of himself that she is lesser functioning. It's hard to know because it's not a lot of language there, but there's evidence in that. Anyway, there's just a lot of ticks in the column of it being an overfunctioner, underfunctioner dynamic. But again, given what I've seen, it doesn't seem extreme. I wouldn't worry too much about their next relationships because of the way that they handled themselves in this conflict. I mean, even for her, she wasn't classically an underfunctioner in that, as he said, you're a project, she reacted against it. She's like, what? So you're like a puppeteer of me? That kind of, and she stayed in the conversation. And then they worked it out. He walked it back. A more rigid, more pathological overfunctioning, underfunctioning, codependent, underfunctioner relationship would be that she would actually sabotage herself. She would become more of an underfunctioner. She would, for example, he says you're a project. That hurts her feelings. And so she might decompensate even more emotionally, or she might threaten to kill herself, or she might say, screw you, I'm going to go drinking with my friends, and then she does a 3-day bender, or she gets violence and the cops are called, or just downward functioning action, which sucks him more into him being an overfunctioner and solidifies that overfunctioner. This underfunctioners, classic, more pathological underfunctioners, are constantly sabotaging themselves, and they don't know that they're doing it. Because classic underfunctioners have so low self-esteem and they believe so little in themselves because of internalized voices that when there's an onslaught on their ego, they just say, screw it. If you think that I am a loser, then I'll show you what a loser I can be. And it's pretty awful. The overfunctioner, a more rigid overfunctioner, if they were to say you're a project, and then she starts to fight back and say, so what, you're like a puppeteer? What kind of BS is this? A more classic pathological overfunctioner would start laying out all these reasons that he said that. He'd be like, remember what we talked about there? Remember what happened last week? It would be this berating, tearing her down, and it wouldn't be what he did, which he's like, okay, you're right. Project, that's not the word I should do. So that flexibility tells me that each of their personalities are not seemingly oriented rigidly to that relationship pattern.
You don't have sex.
It is weird to see somebody that you truly care about with somebody else.
You too cool for school.
You were talking to NBA Cryboy. If you truly think you're gonna go walk up and talk to Mark.
And my summary about Josh is just a blinking neon sign of toxic masculinity. So, as I've said before, masculinity is not toxic. There are toxic elements to masculinity. There are positive elements to masculinity. You can almost point to any large umbrella aspect of quote-unquote masculinity. And I say quote-unquote because each culture has its own version of what is considered the masculine ideal. So it's not a scientific thing. We construct it socially through culture, through history, through politics. So for Josh, he is exhibiting that. I don't know what's going on with him. He could be faking it. I don't know. But typically with toxic masculinity, the reasons why people would adhere to it is because of culture, because of family, because of the way that they were modeled in the, things that they were modeled in their family, because of insecurity, because of abuse. When you feel very bad about yourself, you will search for any shred of a reason to believe that you are a worthy human being. And there's this available construct in our culture called masculinity or hypermasculinity as a way of saying, well, at least I have that. There are rules to that game that I can follow. I do this, I do that, I do this, I do that. And thus, no one can claim that I'm not a hypermasculine person. And in our society, because we are sexist and misogynist in our society, we privilege hypermasculine people. And so they will go in that direction as a way of trying to eke out some level of self-esteem. And again, it might not be that with Josh. It could just be that he culturally is also not only culturally in terms of the way you grew up, but culturally the culture that you're in right now. You take someone that is more general masculine, they enter into the military where there might be a lot more hypermasculinity in that area, and they start to exhibit and believe and act and think like a toxic masculine individual. So the signs that we saw is that he's literally ridiculing Marshall for crying. About what? Like, people cry. It's a human thing. And it's just such a ridiculous thing. I mean, it's not like women are also completely fine with crying. I mean, in my experience as a professor and a therapist, everyone shames themselves for crying, but men in particular, right? Anyway, so that's his appeal to Jackie of just like, you got to dump the guy who is a normal human being and masculine enough, man enough, courageous enough to be able to cry, because that's the healthy thing to do. You don't want to be with that brave soul who cries. You want to be with me who hides my tears because I'm insecure about crying. I mean, it's literally what we're talking about. But that's toxic masculinity for you. Everything's backward, toxic masculine world. And so there's that. And then we saw him acting boisterous and annoying. There seemed to be a lot of cast members that were saying that Josh was a problem in the pods. We don't know the credibility of that, but when you have a lot of people saying the same thing and then you start seeing behavior, you start saying like, whoa. And actually that kind of rewrites the history of when Marshall was in the pods getting really angry at Josh and goes back into the pods to be like, hey, I'm going to confront you, because I'm guessing that Marshall was like, you mean that guy who is annoying all of us? He's the guy that has been secretly trying to get with you and hanging out with us in the pods. And, imagine there's more to it than just what we saw. I don't know. It's also possible that Josh exhibited highly problematic behavior. I mean, who knows what he was doing in the pods? Maybe nothing. But there's also a possibility that he was exhibiting some very problematic sorts of language or behavior. I don't know. I don't want to accuse him of everything. And the show just like, let's just edit that out because we don't want to put that out there. Who knows? But we also saw that he was trying to physically dominate Marshall in this extremely odd fashion. I mean, it was bizarre. It seemed psychopathic, right? It'd be one thing if Josh came in and was all hot and angry and triggered and just goes up to Marshall to be like, you took my woman, or whatever. We can imagine something like that. That also is not great, but at least it feels like a spontaneous emotional outburst. For Josh, it feels more calculated. It feels more planned, or like this is something he's done before, something that's been done to him, which is another part of this whole thing, is that when you go through emasculating and humiliating experiences as a person, particularly as a younger person, there are families or schools where there's a lot of this desperate act to establish yourself as dominant. And if you are constantly, as a smaller person, being made to feel small, being made to feel stupid, being made to feel rejected, then once you grow up and you have the ability to establish yourself as not small and insignificant, then your only model is, well, you're either one of the bullied or you're a bully. So you're either victimizing someone or you're the victim. Who do you want to be? I mean, you will pass by gyms where literally that's a poster. That it won't be worded that way, but there is that message out there, or in business, they'll be like, look, you're either one of the followers or you're the leader, It depends on what we mean by that. But the point is that if you have a lot of trauma, think of Angela on 90 Day Fiancé. I don't know, but she seems like someone who's been through a lot of humiliation trauma. Sometimes that can be abuse. Sometimes it can be verbal abuse or bullying or ganging up on you or whatever. But something like that where you just feel like you have no way out of being just made to feel small and insignificant. And so once you get the ability to establish yourself, then you're like, well, I'm not going to be the victim anymore, so I guess I'm going to be the victimizer. And then, of course, you have this whole repertoire that's been internalized from people that have, in a very planned, very calm manner, screwed with you and dominated you in various different ways. Then you just play out that script. And the way that he was treating Marshall, like, I love you, man. And then, like, you look at me and then, I'm just joking. Well, what, just that back and forth, and then just constant non-consensual grabbing of Marshall. And God bless Marshall for the way that he reacted. And then at the end, he's just like, ugh, which I'll tell you, yeah. I mean, the fact that that's all that Marshall did shows that he's mature enough and secure enough in his masculinity that he doesn't have the need to somehow prove himself in that situation. That's what a real man is. Now, I don't know, who cares? It's real woman, real man. But according to my view of positive, if we're gonna language this within masculinity, because I could just say that's what a true human does, is that they don't stoop to other people's level. But if we're gonna talk in masculine terms, you say, a true man, a real man, doesn't let someone like Josh derail them from their life. They look at them and they say, okay, well, that was weird and frustrating, but I'm not going to ruin my life because of what he did. And if he wants to try to, propose a relationship with my fiance, then, I suppose he can do it. And I'm not going to control Jackie. If Jackie wants to entertain that, she'll call me over if she wants. She's a grown woman. You know what I mean? I'm secure enough in my manhood that I don't need to constantly control everything and dominate everything to assert that I'm a man, because I already know I'm a man, because I just know it because of the way that I am and the way that I've been treated and the relationships I have in my life and the values that I have in my life. So I'm rambling again, but the point is that we don't know much about Josh, but if this behavior is indicative of his personality, there are so many red flags and so many indications of a need for therapy. I've worked with many people like Josh, and there is a very short road from this to completely breaking down and crying. I have worked with a lot of guys like this, and there are some notable moments in my career over the past 27 years or so where I've worked with someone like Josh and really worked hard to try to get past that shell and those defenses. And once I do, and I'm getting chills thinking about a few of those moments, that once I get past that, the human is right there, because the human is so rarely taken care of. The human behind that mask is so rarely seen, so rarely nurtured. And once we get past those defenses, it's just a vast sea of vulnerability and tears and exploration. There was this one client I had that was like this. And of course, I don't do this with every client, but what I ended up doing is I ended up just yelling at him. I was so fed up, so it was partially countertransference of just like, I just wanted to yell at him, which is of course not okay. But I just felt like the therapy was going nowhere with him, and he was just so unrelentingly toxic, masculine, and offended. And I just thought, so part of it was a mistake to go down that road of yelling at him, because it was motivated by countertransference and triggering for myself, and me just wanting to yell at someone because I just felt like I wanted to get back at him, which of course is not a therapeutic or ethical thing to do. But another half of me thought, I wonder if this will work. I wonder if this will actually be speaking his language. And the part of me over here was like, well, it's worth a shot because we're going nowhere. And I've been trying to get this guy to actually work in therapy for months now. So screw it. And so I just went for it, and it did work. But it was weird because I'm just yelling at him, and I'm not yelling at him, but I'm not being diplomatic. I don't know if you can hear. It was some sort of weird buzzing noise. What is that? Is that a chainsaw or something? Anyway, so I started just telling him, like, look, this is your problem, that's your problem, and this is your problem. And until you work on it, then your life is going to continue being like this, this, and this, and this. And you can either man up. I probably didn't say that because that's not a great phrase. You can either deal with it or you cannot. And if you don't deal with it, personally, I don't really give a crap. But your life is going to be shit. It'll be shittier in the future. I don't know what I said. It was something along those lines, And he argued with me, but he didn't reject me. And then at the end of the session, for some reason, the two of us felt the need to hug. Which we had never done before. And I don't hug my clients usually. I mean, if they want to hug me, sure, but that doesn't usually happen. It happens sometimes. But so, we both stand up at the end of session, and we both just spontaneously hugged each other. I mean, not like we were bursting out in tears, but it was heartfelt hug. And I thought, what was that? Because at the time I thought, well, we're done, because I just pulled the plug on this therapeutic relationship, for better or for worse. I mean, that was another part of it. It's like, well, if there's a rupture and he fires me as his therapist, then so be it. At least I told him my piece, and maybe it'll plant a seed. I don't know, because we're not getting anywhere, and there's no point in continuing this anyway. And by the way, therapists out there, I don't recommend doing this, of course. It's a huge risk. You could literally be sued if things go wonky with this situation. So I'm not recommending this, by the way. But anyway, so we hug, and then he continued to come to therapy, and every session after that, literally every session, we'd be about halfway through the session because he'd just be talking about surface level stuff, and then I would find a way in, and I would ask a question, or I would highlight something, or I would remind him of something, and then boom, he would just burst into tears halfway through every session. And then every session he would just say, like, every time, man, you always do this to me. And it was just a beautiful therapeutic relationship, and it makes me cry thinking about it. So for Josh, I don't know, but he presents as someone along those lines. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue watching. Let's do a little self-affirmation. What do you say? So I want you to think about, maybe pause the video. I want you to think about something that you're insecure about. We all have insecurities. We're all constantly insecure. No one is not constantly insecure. I'm constantly insecure. It's just a product of our social nature as a social creature. We are very interested in how other people feel and think about us because we depend on that. We evolved that way, clearly. And we never really know how other people think about us. Plus, in our contemporary society, there are way too many people that are in contact with us. And so there are too many question marks out there. So it's just normal to have a lot of question marks about how other people see us, if they accept us, if we're good enough, if we are attractive or smart enough or whatever. So think about that. Take a deep breath, maybe close your eyes, and think about it. And there's various different things you can contemplate. You can either just accept it and just say, you know what? I am very much insecure about my looks or my status in life or how interesting I am or whether or not anyone will ever hire me at another job, or whether or not my friends who don't seem to be calling me, whether or not they actually like me, or whatever the insecurity is. So you can either do that, which is a road to wellness for a lot of people. Another road to wellness is to say, screw you, internalized voice from somewhere, either from family or society or something. Screw you, voice. I am attractive. I am smart. I am a good person. I do try hard in life. People do like me. And you can go to heck. Why am I not swearing? I don't know. So those are two paths. And so, just take some time for yourself. In the hustle and bustle of everyday life, we don't do it enough. So that second thing is you can ask for reassurance from a loved one. Sit them down and just say, hey, I would really love it if you could reassure me that I'm smart enough, or I'm attractive to you, or you really do love me, or I'm worthy of love, or whatever. Sit people down. Maybe it's your boss. You can sit down. Whoa, accidentally pressed the button. Anyway, everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.